few days ago, the crime reel launched a new video about a crime that was committed in England in the 1940s, and I narrated the story. So if you would like to listen to another briefcase narration this week, please go to the link below. Today we are going to the late 19th century, so sit back as we go to New York. Maria Barbella was born on October the 24th, 1868, in the small picturesque town of Ferrandina in southern Italy. Life for Maria may have seemed idyllic growing up in the warm Mediterranean climate surrounded by olive groves, but in reality, the late 19th century was a difficult time for the country, and Maria's family found it hard to earn enough money to support themselves. So in 1892, when Maria was 24 years old, she and her family boarded a ship bound for New York, and they joined the many Italians who had already migrated to the USA. The family were encouraged by the prospect of employment in the rapidly expanding US economy and wanted to experience the excitement of living in a booming city where it was relatively easy for both skilled and unskilled workers to find work and have a steady income. They settled in the Mulberry area of New York City, which was occupied by many fellow Italians, and Maria soon found work as a seamstress. She liked life in the city, even though it was very different to the small Italian town where she had been raised. In August 1893, New York was struck by a powerful and destructive tropical cyclone. Many trees and houses fell down, and for a few days after, Maria nervously went to work, a little more cautiously than she had done in the previous days. She was a shy girl who, despite having lived in the USA for over a year, still only had a basic understanding of English. It was around this time that she met a young Italian man named Domenico Cataldo. He was well known in the area and was outgoing and confident, and like Maria had come to New York a few years earlier to find better employment opportunities. Domenico had worked hard since arriving in New York, and after working in a few different jobs, he started his own shoe shining business. He had his own stand close to the factory where Maria worked, on Canal Street in Lower Manhattan, and he had gained a reputation for being a fast and thorough shoe shiner. He had a large number of regular clients, many of whom were from affluent backgrounds, including lawyers, bankers, and insurance agents. Domenico and Maria would see each other every day as she walked past his shoe shining stand, and if he didn't have a customer, she would stop and they would share a few moments talking. When there was a customer, they would just smile, and as time went by, the two of them tried to speak to each other every day. It seemed that the young, handsome Domenico was very fond of the shy, impressionable Maria. After a while, Domenico started to wait for Maria outside the factory where she worked and would walk her home. Maria, however, was very wary of her dominant and somewhat overprotected father, so she never allowed him to accompany her to her door. Instead, they would say their goodbyes on the corner of the street, and Maria would enter the house she shared with her parents and get on with helping her mother. She knew that her father would disapprove of Domenico, and even though he had a successful shoe shining business, her father would demand that she marry a man who was in what he considered to be a more respectable type of employment. But it was hard to keep their friendship from him, and neighbours often saw them walking back together after work, laughing and joking, and it was very apparent to everyone who saw them that they were very happy in each other's company. Inevitably, Maria's parents eventually found out about the young man that their daughter was spending so much time with, and her father forbade her from seeing him. Maria had never disobeyed her father before and always respected his wishes. She told Domenico that she could no longer see him and started to take a different route to work. But after a few weeks, she began to miss their friendly morning conversations and their discussions about what they were going to do with their lives. He had always told Maria that he had plans to open a barber's shop, and she had told him how she wanted to get married and have a family. They had always shared their visions of the future and also reminisced of their past. Maria was starting to feel a bit lonely, but she knew her father only wanted the best for her, so did not disobey him. For a while, Domenico respected the wishes of Maria's parents and didn't have any contact with their daughter. But as time went by, he again started to pursue her. At first, she told him that she could not see him, but Domenico was persistent, and eventually she relented, and they started to meet up again. And after a while, they went to a boarding house together. When their relationship became intimate, Maria demanded that he marry her. She was from a very religious background and had very strong opinions about morals and decency. Domenico, however, had no plans to marry Maria. He showed her his savings book, which consisted of savings in excess of $400, and told her that in time they could get married, but first they would need a place to live, so she needed to be patient. Over the next few months, the couple continued to spend time together. Eventually, he agreed to marry her if her parents paid him a dowry of $200, but Maria's parents lived pretty much day by day, and it was not possible for them to raise that amount of money. Even if Maria's father had suspected that she was seeing Domenico again, Maria knew that if she spoke to him about the dowry, he would be very angry, and she would no longer be allowed to meet up with her boyfriend. The situation was not easy for her, but Domenico knew that this request was never going to be fulfilled, and he was happy in the knowledge that it meant he could put off any conversation of marriage for a little longer. However, there was one thing that Domenico had always failed to tell Maria, and that was the fact that he was already married and had 3 children. He had left his family in Italy to come to New York to try and get enough money so he could support them, and he always planned to return to his homeland when he had saved enough to be able to start his own business. When Domenico told her that he was returning to Italy, Maria was distraught. She believed that he had deceived her, that he had seduced her by making a false promise of marriage, but in reality, he had never had any intention of ever marrying her. Anxious and upset, she confided in her mother. She told her that she was ashamed and that she would now never be able to find a husband, as she was 27 years old and Domenico had taken her honour. On April the 26th, 1895, Maria and her mother went to find Domenico. They found him playing cards in a saloon on East 13th Street. Both women entered the bar and confronted the man who Maria had expected to marry. When Maria's mother told him that he must fulfill his commitment to marry her daughter, an unconcerned Domenico casually replied, "Only a pig can marry her." Maria was already distressed, and now she had been insulted by the man she loved. Why had he done this to her? All she ever wanted to do was work hard, get married, and have a family. What had happened to all the visions of the future they had shared? She felt used and betrayed. Maria then put her hand on Domenico's shoulder, and as he tried to push her away, she slashed his throat with a razor. It all happened so fast that he had no chance to scream or say another word. He rose from his chair, stumbled into the street, and clutching his throat, he fell to the ground and died. Maria and her mother then went home, but it did not take long for the police to catch up with them, and Maria Barbella was arrested. She was represented by 2 relatively unknown attorneys named Amos Evans and Henry Cedric. Both men visited her once in prison to understand her versions of events of the 26th of April, 1895. Strangely, however, they did not speak to her again until the trial started on Thursday, July the 11th. Maria arrived in court wearing a dress she had made while in prison, and the jury consisted of 12 men, none of whom were Italian, and the judge was John W. Goff. Maria admitted the crime, but said that she had not meant to kill Domenico. She claimed that she had just wanted to cut him so he could feel some of the pain that she was feeling. She said she ran away as she was afraid of him, as he had in the past been violent towards her. Prosecution witnesses who were in the bar on the day of the crime described of how Maria had attacked the victim, and the police officer who had gone to her house after the attack told the court how he found the dress she had been wearing hidden behind a stall and covered in blood. The deputy coroner spoke of how the victim had died due to loss of blood from the severe injuries inflicted on him by the defendants. Maria's defence team strategy was to try and make Domenico out to be a bad person, a man who seduced women by making false promises to them, a gambler and a drunk. But the prosecution presented their own witnesses who defended his character. When summing up the case, the judge stated that from the evidence, it appeared that Maria had acted in a fully conscious manner. He advised the jury not to have mercy on her. He said, "Your verdict must be an example of justice. A jury must not concern itself with mercy." The trial only lasted a week, and on Thursday, July the 18th, the jury was sent out to deliberate. But they only needed a short time to reach their decision, and less than an hour after being sent out by the judge, the jury foreman informed the court that they found the defendant, Maria Barbella, guilty of the murder of Domenico Cataldo, and the judge sentenced her to death. She was then transported to Sing Sing State Penitentiary to await her execution by the electric chair. Maria was only the second woman to be sentenced to be executed in this manner, but the first, Lizzie Halliday, had had her sentence commuted. The newspapers filled their columns with news of the verdict, and many people, especially those from the Italian part of the city, were convinced that she hadn't been given a fair trial. A petition was organised demanding a retrial, or at least a change to a more lenient sentence, and it was signed by thousands of people. One of Maria's most prominent supporters was an American lady named Cora Slocum. She had married a well-known Italian and had followed the trial from her impressive Italian residence. Following the verdict, she made the trip to New York and visited Maria in prison. Convinced that her crime was not premeditated, she hired two prominent New York lawyers to put the evidence together to enable the court to grant a retrial. The lawyers cited errors in the first case, such as the judge excluding testimony critical of the victim and instructing the jury to return a guilty verdict. And on the 21st of April, 1896, the Court of Appeal agreed to grant Maria a retrial. This time, the defence presented the case from a very different perspective and outlined how throughout the years, Maria's family had suffered from mental illness, and this was backed up by many witnesses who knew them. Maria was now able to speak far more fluently in English, as while she was in prison, she had been taught by the warden and his wife. Many character witnesses told the court that the defendant was a nice, charming young lady, and the defence also proved that on the day of the murder, the victim was carrying a knife. One significant point was stressed, and that was when Domenico said of Maria to her mother, "Only a pig can marry her." The defence claimed that these words had brought on an epileptic seizure, and then she committed the crime. On December the 10th, 1896, the trial ended, and the jury found the defendant, Maria Barbella, not guilty of the murder, and Maria was immediately released from custody. She returned to live with her parents, and less than a year later, on the 4th of November, 1897, she married an Italian named Francesco Bruno, and in 1899, she gave birth to a son, who they named Frederick. Little is known of Maria's life after that. In 1902, her husband returned to Italy and remarried, and Maria, who stayed in New York, disappeared from public life. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As per usual, please leave any comments and feedback you may have, and if you have time, maybe go and listen to the case that I narrated for the crime reel. And I will see you in the next brief case